What is up, Brad fans? Thank you for tuning in. And as always, the reminder to subscribe, comment, rate, review, all that great stuff helps us out. And get in touch with the show at 2brad4u, Instagram, Twitter. You can go to the website, 2brad4u.wordpress.com. There's a contact form there. So please, if you want us to cover anything, hit us up. We'll do our best to try and cover all that stuff that you are asking about. And yeah, that's it, the usual. So for this episode, I was joined by, one of my oldest friends in the world and one of my favorite people to talk to, my good friend Matt Easton, back in Calgary, Alberta. Um, we've known each other since like fourth or fifth grade or something like this. So we go way back. And we always have great conversations, always have, about weird, wild, wacky stuff. He's a really smart guy, and very curious guy. So we always get into different things, whether it's science, or in this episode we touch on aliens even, which is a favorite subject of ours. But I think we need just a tiny bit of context for this, because really the episode ended up kind of being about, where do we find accurate information? Where do we find truth in this day and age on the internet? Because when I first asked Matt if he wanted to do the podcast, he was like, okay, cool. You should check out these things that I've been listening to because I'd like your opinion on them. And it was some podcasts by a fella named Brett Weinstein. I don't know, maybe. You may have heard of him recently if you're into the podcast world. He's been on the famous Joe Rogan show a couple of times, and the episode that Matt shared with me was about this guy. He's an evolutionary biologist, trained evolutionary biologist, talking about how he thinks the lab leak hypothesis isn't getting the attention that it deserves, and that he's leaning towards that. Now, I disagree. I think there's a lot of reasons why I disagree with him on that, but we don't really go as much into the details. It's kind of more about well, what's true? Why would he say this when the rest of the world is saying this? Or and it just we really just once Matt and I start talking, it just goes and goes. So we cover a lot of different things in that area. But the Brett Weinstein fellow, if you want to look him up, he also recently on a podcast talked about how he claims he made a discovery about the length of telomeres in laboratory mice, and how there's been a breeding error that has elongated the telomeres of mice, and how this could affect drug models in pharmaceutical industry and stuff. Again, it got a bit of play if you're in those worlds, in some of these podcast worlds. If you're not, you can look it up. I'll put some links on the website to it so you can kind of inform yourself about the story. But again, it comes down to, why would somebody say this? Is he just a kind of a paranoid individual that's finding conspiracies everywhere? That's a little bit of the context, and I feel like I've rambled on already a bit too much, but I just wanted to give people a bit of background, because we jump right into it. We literally, we just boom start. So maybe there needs to be a bit of context on some of who these characters are. But like I said, that's kind of a bit of the background. Look it up if you want to. Otherwise, yeah, it's a discussion mainly about where do we find truth in these times, and what is the value of some of these podcasts with the whether they're scientists or comedians or whatever. What should the rules be? Should there be rules? And we don't come up with any answers, I'll tell you that right now. But it was a very fun conversation to have, and of course, like I teased, we did shift to aliens, because I can't talk to Matt without talking about aliens. Maybe one day we'll get him on the podcast to tell his UFO story. But yeah, it was a blast to talk to him. I hope you enjoy it. Hit us up if you have any questions about some of the topics or whatever, or if you're interested in this kind of stuff. We can cover it again with some other folks I know who are interested. Some of the other guys that have been on the podcast before would love to weigh in on some of these topics, I'm sure, and they're all equally curious, insightful, smart people. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this conversation with my good friend Matt. All right, now we're rolling.
Okay.
What's up, man? Good to
How you
see
doing,
you.
brother? It's good to be
Yeah,
here.
excellent. Okay, well, we were just talking off air about the podcast that you had sent to me, the Brett Weinstein podcast, Dark Horse podcast, talking about the where he was discussing the coronavirus in terms of whether it was a lab leak or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the interesting conversation here, because we've talked about it, I've talked about it on this podcast before, the sort of scientific arguments as to why it's unlikely, according to some scientists, that it's first of all engineered, and then
No, not
the
necessarily engineered, but like
right,
gain of
but
function research gone wrong.
right. But that's the thing, is that there's three different scenarios, really. Is like there's natural evolution, that this thing just jumped, from some species, likely a bat, into something else, potentially a pangolin, and then to humans. Although there's also potentially other steps in that chain that we don't know yet. That's
Mm-hmm.
a big point, right? That's one that I think he doesn't really address in his argument, and it's kind of a blind spot. There's that it was specifically designed, like it was, somehow engineered in a lab and then got out, or if you want to go even further, was released on purpose. And then there's one that it was just like a natural, they had it in the lab. It was a lab strain that got out accidentally, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it does, and that one doesn't imply that there was like specifically anything done to it in terms of manipulating it in some way, but it was just in the lab and got out.
Yep.
But the question is, well, the interesting thing is, and this is what we've kind of been, talking about off air, is like, well, how do you know the truth, right? Like, and who do you turn to in this somewhat crowded, becoming crowded media space,
Well, I
And
think
this is
that's
a question,
that's the story of our times right now is discerning truth. This is like that's the big problem.
right?
Where do we
Right.
find it? So I throw like I have a an advantage as being a guy with highly educated friends. Like if this is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I can call my friend up and say, "Hey, I just got this piece of media. It's compelling to the limits of what I understand. I'm not a biologist, so I can phone you up and say, "Hey, Brad, I can slide this across your desk and say, just take a look at this and tell me what you think
What do
of
you
it."
think?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's helpful, and I think that this question of, where do we find truth and all this, this to me has been really, really an interesting question, even more so than the lab leak question, because, as someone who does podcasts and talks shit onto the internet all the time, I understand that people, not want, being like, you can't censor this stuff, you can't, you shouldn't, everyone can say what they want, and good ideas will out trump bad ideas, and stuff like this.
Out Trump. Good.
Right, don't censor me,
Good.
bro.
That's right.
Well, you know what I mean, right? Like, I get that, like, I love that, and I think that it's great, and I think the internet's been amazing for that. But in light of a very serious public health issue, I can see where that is a negative, And I mean, you could always make the case for the negative with the politics and everything else. But I find, like, politics, it's more like it can be a bit more, well, that's your opinion, you know? But when it comes to, like, is this virus real? Well, that's not really an opinion, it's real, So I'm seeing the limits of, like, where I'm willing to, I'm feeling myself push to a limit where I'm like, well, as a person that, like, really doesn't want to see anyone get censored, am I comfortable with a guy like, let's say, Joe Rogan, who's got one of the hugest shows in the world, on a weekly basis spouting some fucking nonsense that you can say that he can turn around and be like, oh yeah, but I'm just a comedian. If you're getting your information from me, you know, That's not good. But then in the next breath, say something with such authority that his audience may or may not be able to discern, or obviously doesn't discern, because they, you know, what he says for a lot of people is gospel truth. Now, should it be that
And we
way?
all
And is
know
he
how jealous you
responsible for
are
that?
of Joe Rogan's highly successful podcast. I get it. I get it. The resentment is palpable. I understand this.
Right, of course. That's what this is all about. But you do see what I'm saying, right?
Well,
Like
the
there's
question for me is like right now we're like it's so weird these times. Like it started with COVID and now it's with this whole I don't even really know what to call it. This social
upheaval.
upheaval, sure. So I've had to play these games with the news, like because it's just a bad news story and it's a stressful game. So it's like there was a while there where Ashley, my partner, was saying to me, he's like, "Why are you so invested in this? Like, what are you? Why are you going down this rabbit hole? Why is this? Why is this taking up so much of your bandwidth? Essentially,
Yeah.
is kind of what was going on." And I had to think about that and be like, well, it's because I can't understand where to look to get honest answers because mainstream media seems to be corrupted and full of bullshit. Truth exists in it. It's not like it's not there, but
Mhm.
it doesn't seem to be a trustworthy source. So then you have alternative news sources. I Rogan is the biggest example of it.
Mhm.
But he's not where I go to develop
To
any
get good
to get
information.
it.
Yeah.
He's going to tell me about his new protein
He might
shake.
introduce you to people who you then.
Well, that's what's interesting about him. He gets
Yeah.
guests on that are really cool, and it's like, well, I kind of want to
Yeah.
hear what he has to say. And then
Yeah.
you go down that rabbit hole. So then, like we're talking about this Brett Weinstein guy, I got onto him through his brother Eric Weinstein, I got onto him through the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
Eric is the theoretical mathematician, and then Brett's the evolutionary biologist. I think
Yeah,
is
yeah.
their shticks. Um, so then you consume that media, and you're looking at it. Well, like it seems more honest. It seems less corrupted. But at the same time, is it? Like, is this
Right.
just like? And so for me, it's just like this. It's just a confusing game of talking to people. Thankfully, I have good people like you, Mitsu, like people that I can ask questions to that are actually in the science community that can help me out.
Mhm.
But it's just a weird world where it's just like, well, I'm trying to paint a picture for myself so I can at least understand for myself the fuck is going on right now. And
Mhm.
I'm having a really tricky time doing that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know where to go.
Yeah. I think I think the thing with anything though, and I guess maybe this is what we're learning because of all of this, like, you know, different information, and this is the internet, like you have access to all this information, is we have to be better at discerning information. And it's just not, you can't do it all, right? Like you can't know everything, right? And no one can know everything. So getting bits of information from each kind of slice and trying to patch together, a worldview based on that, maybe that's the best way to go. It's difficult. I don't know, because like
Well, there's
even
also
for
all these other
me.
weird things that are play at the same time that make it even more confusing. Like the algorithms that decide what headlines to put to your device at whatever point, how your search engines filter things. That's all at play while you're trying to figure out an accurate depiction of the world. You're immediately the game is fucked. Like you're immediately it's
It's
skewed
skewed, yeah.
and throwing things through a lens that's not the best. If the objective is to find the truth, that's not the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
So it's like we have these hurdles that we have to get over that are unfolded. We don't even really like you were talking about truth in the internet and like I think I was listening to your podcast actually a little while ago. You guys were I think Barg and maybe Coleman were on it talking
Mhm.
about how the internet was supposed to be something. It was supposed to be this like enlightenment tool, and it's proved to be a bunch of cat pictures and
People
like
yelling at each other.
echo chambering
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's not what it seems to be. So and if those are the tools we're using and they're set up the way they are, it's kind of an uphill fight trying to figure out what's legitimate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think like it's about how it's built, how it was built, what the incentives are. You have the incentives now of data. Your data, our data, is the biggest incentive for
Hmm.
internet companies. So they've provided all these free services, and I've heard the argument from a former guy at Facebook. I think it was a former guy at Facebook, talking about how he was talking about the problem with data and how we've all given away our data and we don't understand how powerful of a tool that is, and all those arguments, which is a really hard argument to explain to people. I find this is one of the hardest issues to try and explain when you've heard something shocking from someone who like used to work at one of these companies, and you're like, holy shit, we should be worried about this. You try and explain it to someone else and they're just like, I've not done anything wrong, why should I give a fuck about what they see? Anyway.
Well, people also don't. The normal people in the world, the everyday you and me's, that we don't. We have a tough time understanding the monetary value of abstract concepts
Yeah, bits and
like
bytes.
yeah, bits and bytes. We've never turned that into a $5 bill, so it's just it's a weird thing.
Yeah, right. But then, so anyway, one of the points he was making is that our insistence on having free shit has actually made this worse. Whereas like if you had a modest pay system, it could still be cheaper because it's the internet, right? Like, so the service could be provided cheaper, whether it's movies, music, blah blah blah, all this, and we're seeing that with Netflix and Spotify and stuff. And obviously, there's issues with Spotify and how the artists don't get paid as much. There's issues with everything. But
Yeah,
he was saying that this idea that has become baked into the internet, that everything should be free, has led to, well, the profit is now in advertising. The profit is now in data. And there's even more incentive for them to be like, fine, I'll give you your shit for free. But in order for me to get mine on my back end and build the systems that allow you to stream and for us to have this conversation and shit, we're going to take your data.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, back to the thing of the example of the Weinsteins and the lab leak thing. It's like, I think that these guys are genuine in their pursuits and they're genuine in what they believe. But I mean, I don't think that they're wholly unbiased. I mean, I think that in the case of this Brett Weinstein, who was run out of his institution because of some woke, backlash kind of BS, as far as it looks, the whole evergreen college thing where he got kicked out of his school. Now he's left and he needs to make money, and he's found a way to make money with podcasts. So driving up podcast listens becomes a bias. I'm not saying that's what he's doing. I'm not saying that he's like
I mean,
saying some shit just to
he
get
seems to have
headlines.
been kicking the hornet's nest long before podcasts were even a thing. Like with the whole mice and the telomere thing. Like, I
Right.
don't. That's my other question. Like that
This
seems
is
to me like it's pretty interesting stuff. And like Teresa came to mind, your wife, right away. And her work with lab mice. Uh, if that's the case, and his argument, like for anybody who doesn't know, is basically that, um, to the best of my understanding, is that the lab mice that they've been using have been essentially evolving in a lab scenario. So they don't actually represent a true population of mice. Their telomere, there's an understanding that lab mice have exceptionally long telomeres. His proposition was that if you go and find some mice in the wild, their telomeres might look like you'd expect to see, and that seemed to be the case.
mhm.
The big takeaway from this being that every single thing we've studied on mice in terms of pharmaceuticals or whatever is now tainted, because we were doing bad science to get there. Is
Yeah.
that is that somewhat right?
Yeah. And the thing though, and this is again like, I don't I don't know what he has encountered. Like, I don't know. He says that he's tried to raise this issue with numerous people and been shut out and all this stuff. But this was going to be my next point, was that this is another source of bias, I think, that could be considered. And again, I'm not saying that these guys are doing anything on purpose, but him and his brother both seem to have been, in their
Jilted.
minds, wronged
Yeah.
by the institution.
Yeah.
And therefore, I feel like when you've been wronged, and to such an egregious level as for the Brett Weinstein, the telomere thing, at if it's true, what it sounds to me is at the minimum that yes, there's this giant flaw in pharmaceutical research or lab models and stuff, and I have a couple points on that because it's there's a lot of flaws with those models. Um, but at best, he got scooped. He made this great, interesting discovery, and people shut him out of it in order that they could publish it themselves. And one of them ended up winning a Nobel Prize.
Right.
And if that's the case, and that's going to jade your worldview, or could jade your
Hmm.
worldview on these institutions. And the minute you start, the minute you encounter a cover up or whatever at that level, it would be easy to then start seeing that in other places. That's something that I consider. And both him and his brother his brother more so, Eric
His brother
Weinstein.
Eric's totally, yeah. I agree with you.
He's,
He's
like,
he's pissed. He's been jilted.
yeah, yeah. And it's like, I actually really like both those guys. They have very interesting ideas on a lot of things, but I can't help but on some things where I'm just like the lab leaks thing that he presented. Like I was saying to you off air, is like he's presented these things saying, isn't this weird? Isn't it a coincidence that the virus has this, cleavage site? And isn't it a coincidence that it's mutated in this way and that way? And it's like, yeah, again, the whole virology community, as far as I saw, from the papers that were published by the top people in the field and stuff, saying, yes, that's odd, but there's a number of explanations as to why that would happen. And being the three things that we laid out at the beginning, whether it's, natural, somebody made the virus, or it just, they had it in the lab and it did something weird and then escaped, you know, those are all possibilities. But he's only presenting one as, what he really thinks is the thing, without and totally saying, well, the other ones aren't possible. The other ones, the chances are very unlikely. But that's just his opinion, man. Like, I'm looking at it and
Well,
being
no,
like,
I get
what
you,
I'm
man. But like
reading
at the
is
same time, I'm looking at these guys, and it's like you could be right, and time will tell what happens next. But Brett, at the very least, doesn't seem like a guy who would be uninterested in having a virologist on with the complete opposite perspective, and to hash it out in podcast form. Like he
right.
doesn't seem like he's shying away from these types of ideas. I look at him more of like a guy who's I don't even know what I
But
look.
what do you mean? Like, but I don't know if he's invited anybody
Well,
on to.
you're saying he's biased, and then he's saying this he's putting a skewed perspective forward, or at least one sided. And I wonder, and time will tell, because like you have to start with your point, and then allow the counterpoint to be made. Like we'll see if he has somebody else. But basically, my point is like if he has somebody onto his podcast and saying, "Hey, man, you're nuts. I've been studying this since it started. Here's my. You just pointed out all of these things that are exceptionally strange about this virus, and would answer a lot of questions. Blah blah fucking blah. Here's my counterpoint to all those points."
But that's the thing, is that the counterpoints have been made. And
Okay,
but his point is just, I don't believe those counterpoints. Like, he didn't bring up the counterpoints in his, but if you go and look at the
and that's a good
papers,
point.
they, they fucking say, of course, we can't 100% rule out that it was a lab leak. But this is the reason why we think that it's probably evolution,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact is that there would be some evidence of it being engineered, or even gain of function research gone wrong. So gain of function research being that you add a gene into a strain to then see if it, becomes more
Which is
virulent and stuff.
apparently super common. Which like I'm hearing about. Is that super common? Like,
It's
what's the
not
deal with that?
super common. It's very regulated. It's highly regulated, and I think there's a moratorium on it in most places,
Okay.
because it's so considered so dangerous. There was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a big debate about whether we should be doing this at all, and the scientific community was split. Like, there's people that say no, we don't, and there's others that say yes, this is the only way to find out, to predict the, what could happen, and try and stop it before it happens. So but there's no doubt that it's risky. You could create something that you then.
I was chewing on this the other day. I was thinking about it. It's just like, it was like, that seems like it's way too dangerous. But at the same time, you're juggling these two things. It's like, but we need to do the research. We need these answers. seems to be the only way to get it. Should
Man,
we
it's a
just not do it entirely and just close that? Like, what do we do with that?
well, and then
Like,
there's the whole other political argument too of like, well, if we don't do it, they'll do it.
yeah,
And we have, the Cold War situation, right? Like
right.
we got to beat them to the bomb kind of thing. So there's all
Hmm.
those things. And I mean, that's one of the most fascinating things about science, right? Is you get to these points where you're like, holy fuck, like what are we doing here? And what are the pros and cons? I mean, even just in animal research, look at like using animals, the ethical questions that come up in there. And their whole thing there is like balancing, is this worth what we're doing to the animals? Is the knowledge worth it? And the same would be with gain of function. Is the knowledge that you could potentially gain worth it? And it's a question that should absolutely be asked and should be had. And
But
in
because the answer, because we don't know, like, it's not like you're looking for something specific. You might be, but it seems like, how could you know the value of what you find if you don't know what you're really looking for? It's like,
yeah,
it's a really tricky one. Like,
that's basic research, right? Like that's the argument for basic research. And this comes to like how research is funded, because a lot of governments now move to wanting to only fund research that you can say this will lead to this. Like we'll do this research and in 5 years we'll have this product or we'll have this drug or we'll have this thing, right? And that's
hmm.
the wrong way to do research. I mean, you need some of that, but you also need research for the sake of research, to find these new things, to find these discoveries, to give you a platform to then say, oh, hey, look what we found. We can actually do this with it. And then you start the application research, then you find like, oh,
Hmm.
we could actually do something. In the case of gain of function, I think you would do it to try and find like, oh, look at the virus mutated this way to adapt to a human cell, and then you would have a target to try and combat that. So that would, by seeing the virus and what it did to adapt to a human cell, you would be like, okay, we could try and design a drug to block that, or we could
Yeah.
try and design an antibody to put in a vaccine that would block that. That's why you do it. So there is benefit to it.
Well, nobody threw out any of the Nazi papers after World War II.
Right, exactly, right.
So,
It's,
like, we
I
don't
mean,
like how they got this information, but nobody threw that out. It's like,
yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah,
but that's the question, because we don't want to do that. We do, like, we can't. There is an ethical question with science that, obviously we need to address. But it is funny. Like, I have friends in the science community, and then there's just the general public that I'm much more exposed to, and it's like, it's not really a question that people even think about. It's just like, gain of function research. Should we be doing it? It's just like, that's not a question you're going to hear asked to people on the street.
yeah,
Should we build a wall or not? That's a question that might be asked to people on the street. But, like,
yeah,
you don't get these types of questions. But these questions are incredibly, incredibly
right,
important,
right.
and people should know more about it.
Right. And this is like the whole thing, I just did that podcast for that magazine in the States at Undark, talking about animal research
Yeah, yeah,
and the
right. I
ethics
heard
of
that
it,
one.
right?
Good.
And this is exactly like you come down to this same crux, right? Where you have people within the scientific community being like, well, you know, we don't talk about it with the public because they don't want to know or they won't understand or this or that, and you have members of the public that are like, I don't want to, I don't know anything about that. And they would be curious to learn more. And you have the people that are against it and stuff. But there is a lack of communication there in terms of, look at, this is what we're doing. This is what the science community is doing. Have a say. And I mean, it's like, what are the mechanisms like that a normal guy like you or me or whatever, who's not in the institution, like, what do we do? How do we say, if we're like, we disagree with that, what do we do? You can like protest outside the lab or whatever. But I mean, it comes down to pressure your MP or whatever to fund this or fund that, or these kind of things. So there's also this disconnect there, because it's like all things with politics, people feel like, well, what am I going to do? Like,
You can't even touch these systems anyways.
right, yeah.
It
So,
feels
but I
like,
think that it's a very valid point that you wouldn't ask that. People don't know what's going on. And that, I think, is a bad thing, because it breeds mistrust. Because now when you have this situation where we're all faced with this pandemic and, did it come from a lab? Didn't it come from a lab? And it's, there's obviously, the heated political climate that we're in right now. And this is kind of the thing, I guess, that irks me a bit about it, is that, and maybe this is my bias, is that, I'm going with the experts, the top virologists in the field that have published these papers that are like, look, at if it was an engineered virus, we would expect to see this, this, this. We don't see that. Therefore, we lean towards it's not engineered. If it was, some strain that got out of the lab, you would expect this, this, this. We don't see that. Therefore, it's probably a natural cause. Now, natural cause, let's look at, what the virus is, what it's related to. We got these unknown questions as to how it developed these mutations, where exactly did it come from, this and that. These are the unknown questions. And the papers that I'm reading that are saying it's unlikely it came from a lab are not saying you're an idiot for thinking it came from the lab. It didn't, 100% case closed, don't look here. They're saying, look, there's no way we can prove one way or for another. Like, we have these benchmarks that would clearly show that it was manipulated and came from a lab. We don't see those. Now, that doesn't mean that it wasn't. But there's nothing we can do, until you can go into that lab and look at all the records and, do this. And, you've got to kind of believe the people that are working there, who are colleagues of the rest of these people. It's not like they're working in isolation in some secret government lab. These people go to conferences. They've published papers with other scientists from around the world. It's not that secretive of a thing. But
Mm-hmm.
until someone comes out from that lab and says, yes, we had this strain that no one knew about, we totally kept it secret from everybody, and we had been manipulating it or working on it for years, and it got out. Until that happens, you look at what you have. And what you have can be explained by the way that viruses work. 60% of all new infections over the last 30 years have come from animals. It's not an uncommon thing. For 15 years, the virus community and people working on vaccines and stuff have been saying, watch out. This is something we should be surveying bats. We should be going to all the wildlife and taking blood samples and seeing what viruses are in there, because one of them motherfuckers is going to jump. It's only a
Well,
matter
that
of
was
time
one of the
before it
other
happens.
things about the story that I thought was a little interesting too. Is like I really am not the expert on this and don't know if any of this shit that I'm about to say is true, but I heard that like they don't even eat bats in Wuhan.
If
That's
it's
not
not
even
about eating bats, it has nothing to do with eating bats.
they're not even there, and the bats that carry coronaviruses are like 2,000 miles away. That seems like an interesting. Somehow they had to get to Wuhan, and they don't
Yeah,
seem
but
like.
it can be any bat.
But if there's no interaction with the like, we're saying it came from a wet market.
No, but no one's saying it came from a wet market.
Really?
No, yes, this idea that it's like, oh, now they're saying it's like, that idea was out
Man,
here months ago.
shows what I know. Shows what I know.
There
Not
was
much.
right away, there was questions as to whether it was the West Market or not. And it's like, and again, this was one of the unknowns, because it's like the first cases, of course they said wet market first, right? And that's because the first like really identifiable cases that got confirmed is like, look, at this is fucking here, it's happening. That was just happened. There happened to be a cluster of cases there, right? So that got flagged. But then when they started looking back at all the people who got it, there was like 30 or 40% of the original cases, they had no connection to the market. So it was like, okay, well, it's probably not the market. Like
Okay.
the market, and so that's again, and that was the problem I had with Weinstein. He's like talking about, oh, it's like, fuck, man, read the papers. People have been talking about this for months. Like, you're just late to the game, dude. So
And then
it's
there's
like,
poor bastards at me that are just trying to figure this out. So I got Brett Weinstein blowing in my sails, telling me it came from a lab. I crash into Brad's podcast. He blows in another direction, and I just go with that too. And it's like, it didn't come from a lab. I know this now. And then what's going to happen next week? What breeze am I going to crash into next week?
I
Fucking
guess
hell.
this was one of the things I was going to say about this broader point about like science communicating with the public more, is that this should also be one of those understandings, though, is that it's going to fucking change, and it can change
Mm.
on a dime. You find a new bit of information, then you have to throw everything, like if that falsifies everything that you knew before, then you have to go with that, right? And so that's the thing that I have, the problem I have a bit with the Weinstein thing, is that he's like, from what I saw, he wasn't presenting any new argument that hadn't already been presented and said, this is weird. We don't know where this came from.
So
You
then,
know,
what role do you think guys like him are playing in this world right now? Like, you don't think he's a bad actor that's has malicious intent, concerned with spreading lies and misinformation, but he's not getting the truth right. So, like, what role does he play, and what importance should we put on guys like him in that type of thinking?
I don't know. I really don't know. And to be honest, it makes me question whether I should be doing whether I should be doing podcasts, you know? Because it's like I get shit wrong, you know? We all do, right? And I try to be very, upfront, like about the limits of my knowledge and stuff like that. And I, from what I see, he does too, but I don't know. Like, what do you do? And I think it's like you got to kind of like look at, maybe it comes down to like we need like, a trusted expert in every goddamn field where you're like, oh, this is the podcast I go for weather, climate stuff. This is the podcast I go to for like
Turtles.
health. Yeah, turtles. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Because I don't know. Because like I said, yeah, I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's caught up in, you go from obscurity to famous to some extent. If you go on the Joe Rogan podcast, you get exposed to like 10 million people, right? Like an audience of 10 million people. He said himself, now he went from like a nobody to 300,000 followers on Twitter and X number of YouTube subscribers, and now that's his money, that's his income, is
Hmm.
being this public thing. So I think that 100% starts to creep in to
It has
influence your
to,
stuff.
no
And
doubt.
like I said, if you feel like you've been jilted by the system, and looks like he has been, you know, on a number of occasions, fucked by the
Hmm.
system.
Hmm.
So I look at him as like, I love to hear him talk about his experience of, what he experienced at his university, where the people turned on him and started calling him racist when he's clearly not a racist. And that, like, I find that interesting because it's something that he can speak to, that he's gone through. Like, I don't agree with everything he says,
But
but
it is weird though, because like he's an evolutionary biologist that then is asked to weigh in on this completely different beast, that he experienced at that college. So like sometimes I hear him talk about it, and it's like he's you kind of feel bad for him. It's like, this isn't your field. Like, you probably wouldn't even want to talk. Like, the fact that this is why you're famous
yeah.
isn't what you would prefer. You'd rather be known for your work versus this really weird thing that played out at that
Yeah,
college.
there's something that happened to you rather than something you did.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, to be honest, maybe I'm missing something from his lab leak argument, because I don't doubt that he's a really smart guy, smarter than me when it comes to evolutionary biology. He seems to know a fucking shit ton more than I do. But that's why I was like, going into this, I was like listening to the way he was talking about it and listening to the points he's saying. I was like, yeah, but I read that already. Yeah, but or he'd be like, it's very unlikely that pangolins and bats would get together to have this recombination event, for this certain mutation to jump from a bat into a pangolin strain. It's like, yeah, but it didn't have to go directly that way. There could have been another animal in between. Like, that's just bait. Like,
Hmm.
and it's, then it comes down to whether you think that's likely or not. But I don't, there's a million bats out there. There's a million fucking raccoons out there. There's a million other critters running around that all carry these viruses. Doesn't seem that unlikely to me, especially when, again, you see. And then he said something too, like,
I'm finding this conversation incredibly reassuring. This is good. This is good. This is good for me.
well, I don't know if it should be reassuring, dude, because it just like this confirms the warnings that we've ignored for 20 years about zoonotic diseases and a global pandemic. Like, this
Oddly,
isn't
I
new.
still feel quite comforted.
Did you hear about the Ebola thing? I talked about it with
Yeah,
Brad on the last podcast, but like a
yeah.
third potential Ebola outbreak with no link to the other one. That just shows
I
you how these things can jump.
I've been really enjoying that. I heard that on the podcast, and I've been saying to people, it's like 2020 just got better. You know what happened? And everybody looks at you with this super serious face, being like, "What? What now?
Yeah,
I get to
yeah, yeah,
drop that on him. Ebola's coming back.
yeah. Well, Ebola never left, really. I mean,
No, it
it's
didn't
been
really.
simmering for. There was one year, 2017, there wasn't an Ebola outbreak, but since 20, what was it, 14 or 15, that big West African one, that started like there's three different countries, Liberia, and like that was
Yep.
2015, something like that. That stretched like 2015, 2014, something like that, to 2016. 2017, we didn't have any Ebola. 2018, it kicked off again in Congo, and it's been going since then. And now, like, they thought they had it licked, and then another one popped up. But that just shows you, that these things can and do jump, and Ebola is not the only one. Zika virus,
Yes.
and that spread all over the world. What else do you have? Flu. I mean, fucking flu. That's right there.
What's up with
That's
these
a
prion
prime
diseases? I've been
example of
hearing
it,
about these prion diseases. I don't even understand what they are. What's going on there?
dude. These are the ones that terrify me, like, the most.
This,
And
they seem like the boogeyman that I just don't even understand anything about,
yeah,
and
dude,
I know it.
it's
I know it to be alarmed, but that's about it.
well, here's the thing: is that there's right now there's probably there is an incredibly low chance that you would get one, that you or I would get one. The thing that freaks me out about it is that if you do get one, it's like you're fucked. Like it's like 100% death sentence. It's kind of like rabies in that sense. Um, but
Hmm.
rabies, at least, like if you catch it early enough, you can still survive, right? So the creepy thing about prions is that they're not viruses, they're not bacteria, they're not parasites, they're just proteins. So proteins are the things that DNA codes for. So you have DNA, which is like considered like a living molecule. Protein, I guess, is kind of considered it's a biological molecule. But the DNA codes for proteins, and proteins make up everything, every living thing, like your skin, your
Yeah.
cell, like everything's made of proteins at when you break it down to that molecular level. Different proteins for different things, but everything's made of proteins and they do different things in the body. Like some of them, like I said, are just structural, they make skin. Some of them interact with other ones to do the chemical processes that happen in your body. So you have these proteins in your brain and they, do a function in the brain. I'm not sure that anyone really knows exactly what they do, but they're common throughout the brain. And
Called the prion.
no, no, no. This is just fuck. What is the name of the protein? I can't remember. Tau. It might be called tau. Fuck. I wish I remembered. Anyway, there's a protein in your brain and the prion will come in. I'll show you how. So there's this protein in your brain, and all proteins generally, they fold, right? Like the amino acids, you get a chain of amino acids that make up the protein, and
Hmm.
the chemical, properties of these different amino acids, what, electrons are available, they bind to each other, or they sort of loosely are attracted to each other, and that causes the shape of the protein. It's all, they can fold and unfold, and that's how they can grab onto things and do different things, or they form these really intricate structures that then another protein has to fit into, like a key, and that causes a chain reaction of things that makes your cells work, right? So they have these ways that they fold, right? And when they're fold, most of them, you can fold them in different ways depending on the environment, right? So if you change the pH, they might fold in a different way because that's going to change the chemical bonds between the amino acids that make up this protein. That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So in your brain, you have this protein that's everywhere. It's like ubiquitous in your brain. And if it folds,
The tau, potentially the tau protein,
yeah, if
potentially.
if I'm correct, it might be the tau protein.
Right.
Um, it folds in one way, like call it the A form, right? And when it's folded in the A form, no problem. It does what it's supposed to do. But if it folds another way, call it the B form, it starts to just build up into a plaque. It no longer does a function and it just clumps. It makes this like clump that then just you got a clump in your brain. And the shitty thing is that once one of them does it, for some reason that we don't know, it starts to induce that change in all the ones around it. So they all start flipping like dominoes falling over. They all start,
Nobody understands that mechanism at this
nope,
point.
nope. So they all just start flipping to the
What?
B form. And then slowly your brain just all these proteins flip to this B form and turn to useless junk and just clog up your brain and destroy your brain. And you slowly die because your brain is just flipping to this wrong form, and this plaque just forms in your brain and just
So
spreads.
how is it contagious?
Right. So that's what the prions are. The prions are the misfolded version of the protein. And they just, you can,
Would you have to eat it?
yes, you have to eat it. So usually we've found these things in places where people,
Deer.
well, there's a deer version. Yeah, there's a deer
Yeah.
version. And mad cow disease was another version. If you remember the mad cow
Yeah.
outbreak in the UK, and what that happened because they were feeding dead cows to cows as like a protein supplement.
Soylent Green.
Exactly. Yeah, for cow.
Oh, wow.
Soylent Green for
Wow,
cows.
we've done it.
So it
Yeah.
was this like, it was like a, a gross factory farming process where it was like any cow that like whatever wasn't going to the butcher or something, or the parts that weren't being used, they just fucking grind it up and add it as a protein source to fucking cow feed or something like this, right? But when you
Wow.
do that, you're giving these brain proteins, you're putting these brain proteins into the food source, right? And so you can, if you eat enough of these misfolded brain proteins, or you eat these, because there might be one or two kind of floating around, you don't know. If you
And
eat it,
cooking wouldn't matter?
no, that's the other thing about these is that they're highly resistant to disinfection, cook, like high temperatures and stuff like this. Like you can put things at like 1,000 degrees, I think, and you can still find some of these proteins on like a blade or something like that. So they're,
So I'm confused here. If they have no understanding of the mechanism on how this convinces other proteins to misfold and become this clumpled mess, they must have theories as to what it might be.
yeah, I'm
Like,
sure, yeah.
but what would that even look like? How does that like?
Fuck, man, that's the limit of my knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. And so what they're finding though is that, so yeah, normally you would get these things from being exposed to them, right? Like, so you got to eat them or something like that. So they found it actually in cannibals. So cultures that regularly ate other humans, they would get a version of this prion disease.
After the Wendigo shows up?
Yeah, 100%. Well,
Okay.
maybe it's the Wendigo. I don't know.
Oh no. Okay.
This is where science is very unclear about the Wendigo.
Maybe the Wendigo was just a prion disease.
Right. So it's a whole manifestation of these prions. You get enough prions,
Mm-hmm.
they form the Wendigo. Yeah, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now what they're finding, so the deer version, which is called chronic wasting disease,
Yep.
and it's spreading all over North America. What they're finding is that these prions are shed in saliva and shit and other bodily fluids. And that because they're not living, like it's not a living thing, it's just a protein. It's not, it doesn't have a,
There's no objective for the
yeah,
little
it
thing.
doesn't need a, it's not like a bacteria, it has to eat, it has to, live in a certain
It's
environment.
essentially just a really bad shape.
Yes. Yeah, it's just a cog. It's just like a
So it's a
cog that
really
if you
yeah.
throw it, it's like a wrench that you throw in the fucking gears.
Wow.
And so that's what's so weird about it is that but they found that like in saliva and like deer saliva, it can exist for like, over winters and for years, just in the environment. And then all it would take is that you're eating a leaf or something. And I mean, I remember them saying with the mad cow stuff that it's like, you would have to eat a lot of it, right? Because it's got to go like, you're thinking like it's got to go through your digestive system and then somehow get to your brain and like all these things. But it happens. And it's usually if you're eating brain tissue. Like for humans, it was like you'd have to be eating like brains, right? So the cannibals, right? Mad cow, it happened, and from eating beef, tainted beef, some people got it, but I think it was like really small. It's only like 10 people, I think, that got it. Um, But yeah, it's fucked up because once that process starts, it's a chain reaction that nobody knows how to stop. And your brain just turns to a plaque, basically. And it's not a pretty process as you can imagine, it's like your brain is just slowly being eaten away. And that's why you get them like they're shaking and they're drooling and stuff because it's just your brain is just being slowly destroyed. It's fucking
It's
terrifying.
like a little molecule zombie.
Yeah,
eats your brains.
exactly. And I mean, it's the fact that it's not living, like it's not technically living, right? This is the same with viruses, though, because
The
viruses,
viruses aren't really alive either. They're
yeah,
kind of just this little code.
exactly. They're just bits of DNA or RNA that float around. But because they're a biological molecule, like DNA is like which I guess a protein is a biological molecule too. The virus, though, it needs to initiate some more process. Like it does have the function of wanting to replicate itself.
Yeah,
Obviously, wanting is not the right verb, but you know what I mean.
that's what it does. That's all it
Yes,
wants to do. Yeah,
it's
that's its
programmed.
move.
It's
Yeah,
programmed to do that. Once it reaches the cell and fucking once you again, it's kind of like a cascade of like once that virus finds the right cell and it locks on to something on the outside, that a protein goes into another protein and flicks the switch, and then this whole cascade of reactions start happening, and the DNA starts copying itself. DNA
right.
is fucking designed to copy itself, which is fascinating. It's fascinating to think about how like that's really all your body is. From the minute like sperm meets egg, it's like a pre-written code that just starts.
Playing out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just these things start reading the DNA and just start, instruction one, do this. Instruction two, do this. And it's all fucking just
All
chemical
of this
bonds.
incredible process to give us consciousness so I can sit here and tell you how confused I am about what's true and what's not. It's a very weird existence we have here, Brad.
I know, right? But it's fucking, it's beautiful in that way. I think like, that it's
Yeah,
just like these
it
little
is.
tinker machines that just, tuk, 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 just
Yeah.
start going. And then it's like, there's no stopping it.
Yeah,
But
here
I
we
think
go.
that this is, and I can't remember if I said this now, but my point about science being more open with the public is we should talk more about what they don't know. And it's like people do that when it comes to space, like, ooh, we don't know what's out there, or this or that, or dark matter, and it's fun when it's space, but it's not so fun when it's like, where did this virus come from? Or
Hmm.
what's going on with prions? But
Well, that's why I appreciate you doing this podcast and people doing stuff like this because the reality is, I think people don't have a handle on like what is science. Science is to me the scientific method.
basic,
That's basically it. People don't really understand that and how it applies to just figuring absolutely anything out,
yeah.
from the most mundane to the most complex. You apply that method to it and you're going to find the best avenue towards truth or something that looks like it.
Yeah.
And people don't even know how to, I'm saying people. I find it frustrating how you see a lack of that out there
Mhm.
in terms of how people formulate their opinions about the world around them. It's like, wait, well, but look at this, and they're like, well, I can't look at that because if I look at that, well, it's going to change my mind, and we don't want to have my mind changed.
Yeah.
you know,
We're resistant to that, which is a weird psychological
absolutely.
phenomenon, um but I mean, if you think about the scientific method of like test something, if it holds, try it again in a different scenario, and if the result holds, then I have more confidence in that result. Manipulate
Hmm.
one thing, try it again. This is really how you learn. Like
Yeah,
the easiest example is touching the stove when you're a kid. Like, how many times are
yeah.
you going to touch the stove before you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore? My hand is
I remember
burnt.
learning a lesson as a kid with friction. I remember running past a bed and just running my hand on it, burnt my fingers. I
Yeah,
was like, what?
yeah,
What happened? Is that magic? I doubt it.
yeah. But then, and you could try it again in a different scenario and be like, okay, it didn't happen that time.
Yeah,
But
just
if I
can't go
do
too
it, yeah,
fast.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? And then you figure it out. So it's not like it's this like alien process. It's actually a very human
Oh,
thing, of
yeah.
how we figure shit out. The
You can
science,
just watch a baby hanging out and how they like. Well, I'm gonna put this in my mouth. We're gonna start figuring this out
yeah,
from the mouth first. It's like, but it is this whole process of processing.
observation,
Yeah.
result, try it
Yeah.
again, manipulate some kind of variable
Hmm.
in the process and see if that changes the result. The scientific method was just we just wrote it down and like made like really precise sort of methods of how or thought processes of how you do it, where it's like you
Right.
try and when you do an experiment, you do that experiment, you record the result, you observe everything, and then the next thing you do is you change just one thing, or you try and change as few things as possible, right? If you can control everything except one thing, and then do it again, and the result is the same, well, then it wasn't because of that one thing. So then you change
Yeah.
something else, and if the result changes, like, well, maybe it was that thing, and then you start on that. So it's. But I see what you mean. It's like it's less scientific. It's critical thinking, right?
It's critical thinking.
And the fact that in a lot of cases, like being told that changing your mind is a bad thing. Like, oh, you got no conviction, you changed your mind. Well, it's like, and some things, yeah, you know, if you all of a sudden change your mind to think that, Asian people deserve less money or something, it's like, yeah, that's it's not a good thing. But
Yeah.
changing your mind in light of new evidence, and that's been the frustrating thing with this pandemic and stuff too, is like, look at the situation with mask wearing, right?
Yeah.
And again, like, if you take a guy like Eric Weinstein, the flip-flop on mask wearing is this power structure, trying to protect its own ass and fucking us all over because, they didn't want to get caught with their pants down, and they did. And it's like, or they just fucking, it's a new virus and we didn't know.
They didn't know. Yeah.
Like, it's like, so what's it going to be? Like, it could be
Hmm.
a deep ingrained power structure that's, or, and this is where Occam's razor, just like I always defer to, like, what's the most simple explanation? And what's the other quote that always gets bandied around? Don't attribute to malice what stupidity would be, just as good, And it's usually stupidity, or it's usually, ignorance or something, or a blind
Yeah, but
spot.
you misuse Occam's razor all the time. Like you use Occam's razor to discern that it's probably not aliens we see flying around those UFOs. Where I use Occam's razor, and the simplest explanation for me is that fucking aliens flying around.
I don't know if I use Occam's razor for that. I don't know if I use Occam's razor for that, because that is an interesting one. Yeah, that's just an unknown. That's just an unknown. This is not like, we have a situation where it's like, but it is a fascinating unknown. And I will say, like, over all the years that we've known each other, which is what, like 20 now,
20, yeah, 20 plus.
that we've had these discussions about aliens, I've never been so close. I've never been so close to your viewpoint
Yes,
that it's aliens. And to
yes,
be honest, for as much as
yes.
we've
It's
kind
happening.
for as much as we've kind of shit talked the Joe Rogan podcast, he had that motherfucker on. Not Bob Lazar. I did not find Bob Lazar credible. I didn't like Bob
Yeah, he
Lazar.
might be a crackpot.
I
Yeah,
didn't,
if he's telling the truth, it's crazy. But it also just could be a total
yeah, it
bunch of
was
lies.
the military
I
pilot.
believe he believes himself.
I believe he believes himself too, but it was that military pilot that he had on that, and
Yeah.
the Pentagon released the video. We've seen the video, like,
Hmm.
there's something out there that they can't explain that's whipping around. I still, like, I'm a little confused as to, like, the video, like what the distance is, and how good the pilots actually saw it, or were they just looking at it on their instruments? Because then, obviously instrument malfunction or some kind of, like, natural phenomenon that we just haven't understood,
Yeah, but
that, like,
they had the
shows up on
same
the
thing.
instruments.
Yeah, but that was one thing about that incident is that like you had multiple. Um, they had the eye in the sky, the radar plane. They had the battleship cruisers, and they had the aircraft controller. They were all reading the same measurements separately. So it's like if there's it doesn't seem like you can't chalk it up to a glitch
No, I'm not even saying a
because
glitch. I'm saying, like, what if there's some weird phenomenon of, like, I don't know what, but, like, let's just say, like, weather over the ocean at a certain temperature at a certain time creates a static electricity or something. I'm just saying.
aliens, man, it's aliens flying around. It's obvious. It's obvious. It's right in front of you. Just
Well,
grab
what do
it.
you think aliens is more likely than another country having some kind of technology that you don't know about?
If it's another country, it's another country that is unbeknownst to anybody. It would be like Atlantis. It would be something so
Wakanda.
ridiculous. Yeah, Wakanda. It would be along those lines.
Why?
If
Why
it's
would it
if
have
it's
to be
that
that?
because these things are bending. They seem to be bending the rules of physics to perform the way they are. So whatever science they're using is out of this world. Literally, it's crazy.
Yeah, but it's
Even that same instance when that thing just showed up, like it disappeared and then just showed up like 60
But
miles
see,
away or
that to
something like
me
that.
says
What?
some kind of a weird like sensor,
Well,
like, and I'm not saying that
I
it's
see
a
what I
glitch in
see
the
what you're
sensor.
saying.
I'm saying it's like, what if it's like static electricity or some shit, or like ball lightning, like some weird thing like that, where
Well,
it's just like,
if you can go down that path, if you want to call this ball lightning or some sort of weird, like, if I travel at 500 kilometers an hour over an ocean at a 30-degree tilt on my right wing, I'm going to find that I'm going to see these weird balls that are flying around
no,
and
it's
get in
atmospheric,
dog fights with them.
it's
Yeah,
atmospheric
yeah,
conditions.
atmospheric pressure is just right. You might see what you think would be UFOs, but they're not UFOs. It's just your mind playing tricks on you.
It's not your mind playing
So
tricks on you. It's a physical phenomenon that's
is a
happening.
physical phenomenon playing tricks on your instruments.
No, it's not even playing tricks on your instruments. It's just appearing in your instruments, but you just don't know what it is. It doesn't mean that it's a sentient being with a craft flying around.
Well, it seems to me that's exactly what's going on. These are they might
And the
not be
people the
aliens.
people
They
in
might not be aliens, but they seem to be. I would bet they're spaceships.
well, okay, but this is the thing, like, because back in the day, people looked at celestial phenomenon and attributed some kind of sentience to it. They called it the gods, or they called it this, or whatever. But what about this dot that's flying around? And the guy says that the pilots do say that it felt like it knew they were there, and when they got close, it disappeared and stuff like that. But this is
Well, what about the thing they saw in the ocean that they described as being the size of a Boeing 747 under the surface of the water, and that's where this tic tac shot up from.
it wasn't
That's where they immediately started doing their circles around. They
a
saw something
Boeing
under the
747. I
water.
don't think it was that big.
Yeah, they said it was massive. They thought it was a downed plane. That's why they started doing
Huh.
their check it out. I
Yeah,
could
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
wrong,
yeah.
but that's how I remember it.
Again, I and this is why I'm not clear, is like whether they saw it with their eyes or just the instruments, and that would be a different thing, right? Because I'm kind of looking at this as like you're looking at this through a lens, right? Like if it's the instruments, you're looking at it through a lens, and that
You
lens
can
then
they
changes the
with their eyes,
interpretation.
like guaranteed saw it with their eyes. I guarantee that. I could be well. I guarantee it. Matt Easton guaranteed. It's about 50%.
All right. All right, they saw it with their eyes. Great. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
I'm pretty
question
sure
then
they saw it
is,
with their eyes. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And again, my question now is like, what gives it, like, what would it have to do in order for you to be like, it's like reacting to me? You know what I mean? Like it's got some kind of, like, we're having a reaction. Like, like with an animal, you can tell it's looking at you, and you might move and it moves, and you could really tell, right? But it's got eyes so we can see. But like with something like this blob or this tic tac or whatever it is, what about its movements would you have to see in order to indicate like, oh, it's reacting to my presence? That's the other thing that I'm a little like, because if if you felt like it was, then of course you would then put more credence in the it's a sentient ship with a pilot and everything else. But if it's not, if
Well, I
it's
don't know
kind
what
of
it's like to
random,
fly one of those F-16s or whatever they were flying, but from his perspective as the pilot flying one, it seemed to, from his perception, he was engaged in some sort of
dance.
dogfight,
Yeah,
dance with this thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I can't speak to that. I don't know what it's like to fly one of those things. Like,
Me
I don't
neither.
understand, but he seems to believe it. So at some point you have to just you take their word for it and say okay.
Right. And that's exactly it. And that's why I was, like I said, I've never been closer, because that guy, the way he talked about it and the way he described it and the way he comported himself. I mean, this is the other thing, right? Like you kind of have to, how credible is a witness, right? Guy seemed really fucking credible.
Yeah,
And he really seemed like,
yeah, it did to me
I,
too.
I always love the witness that's like, I don't know what I saw, but I saw something and this was it, you know? It
But
it
it's
had
funny that
me.
this one did it for you. I guess it was all the footage that came with it. But pilots, like, there's so many guys that are of the same ilk as that guy that have been saying this for since the 40s, man. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's incredible. Like, it's an old story.
But there's also so many bullshit ones.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess that's for me, like, we're talking about trying to find truth and stuff, is I've seen so many bullshit ones with like people that I'm like, that's you're not credible or this or that. And it does come down to, I will 100% admit this, is like, it could be aliens, and I do believe, like, if you had to put a gun to my head, I believe there's life in the universe other than us, 100%. Now the question is whether they're chose to come to Earth and fuck around on Earth. That to me also, like, when you look at the probabilities, it's like, unless it's just the two of us, and then of course they would come to Earth. But what is the chances that it's just the two of us? If there's more than one, then it's either one or there's a lot, right?
Oh yeah, Fermi paradox.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think with the back to the truth thing, like if we live in a world where like the truth must exist, right? It has to. There is truth. It exists somewhere. If in the avenues you're looking for it, you can't find it, it might show it up, and it probably will show up in the places that seem the most ridiculous. Like, it's like conspiracy
What do you
theories
mean the
are
place like
are
you least
90.
expect it?
Well, yeah, it's got to exist somewhere. So if it's not where you want it to be, say mainstream, whatever,
Yeah.
it's going to be in the fringe. So it's like you look at conspiracy theories, it's like guaranteed 99% of them are absolute shit, but they're not all shit. And there's a little bit of truth every once in a while that comes through those avenues. So you got to be very careful when just saying poo-pooing things that are ridiculous. You have to use your filters,
Yeah.
but you know what? The truth has got to be out there somewhere, and maybe one of those kooks with a tinfoil hat on it got it right. Like, I don't know.
Well,
Mel
that
Gibson from Conspiracy Theory. Remember that movie? That was fantastic.
yeah, it's good. I should go back and watch that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's the thing. So I feel like it's more often it doesn't come from the fringe. It still comes from within the main body of, like, say, like, this is our accepted knowledge. Is this pile over here? It's just something you've overlooked, or a new piece of information comes in and then reconciles with the rest of accepted knowledge. Like, very rarely is there something that comes and, like, wipes out whole fields, like, we had it totally wrong. I mean, that does happen for sure. But and I guess this is different. Like, with the alien thing, it's like we don't have a pile of accepted knowledge where we can be like, well, chances are it's this, that's one of the truly great, like, unknown. Like, there's no, you have to admit that it's a 50-50, flip. Like, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows. You can sit here and look at these videos and say, it could be this, it could be that, and you could build this, like I was, flirting around with. What if it's this? What if it's that? Sensors, all this kind of thing. Fact of the matter is, it doesn't fit into anything.
No.
And if we just take the question of, is there life out there? Nobody fucking knows. And we can theorize forever, but until we find that, we don't know. So when it comes to things like conspiracy theories, or just unknowns about science or something like that, it's in there somewhere. It's within the frame of accepted knowledge. And this is the thing that gets me, again, back to kind of how we started, of, like, these conversations that we're having, on the internet and stuff, where it's like, oh, anything goes. This is the marketplace of ideas, and let's if we just throw ideas out there, the best ones will rise to the top. Well, if there's no rules and there's no one to say, well, actually, your idea doesn't fit with any of the known truths, flat earth, for example, then just the loudest idiot, his idea wins. So this is another
Yep.
question that I have about this whole, great freedom of communication and stuff that we have. There kind of has to be some referee, right? Like, I'm not saying you need censorship or anything, but this is where I'm struggling, is like, you can say, yes, throw everything out to the marketplace of ideas, but if the marketplace of ideas is dominated by whoever's loudest, and there's no real, like, facts don't mean anything, then what are your ideas? Like, what are we judging? How do we judge which is the best idea? You need some kind of framework to say, well, these are established norms, these are established, facts, we'll say, until we get new information that we have to go for. So
Honestly, man, it's looking bleak to me. I don't see like these sense making tools that you're talking about. They would come from education. We need a more educated population in general would be more equipped to critical thinking. Um, but that's just not what I see out there right now. And I don't know that I don't think there's any switch or referee that's going to fix this problem for us. Like it's a slow fix.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a quick one. Um, it's not going to be easy. And I don't even know if it's going to happen. I think like, I don't. I'm always accused of being a pessimist and
I was
stuff.
just gonna say, are you pessimistic or what? What's your?
Well, I like to remain hopeful. There's always, the world right now. I think some great leadership would go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Seems like it's just not anywhere you look, which is crazy. Um, that might help, but
What do you mean?
I
You're
don't
not
know,
an
man.
Angela Merkel fan?
She's a beaut. She's a beaut.
She's doing her
No, I
best,
don't
I'd
know.
say.
She's doing her best. She's doing her best. Aren't we all? That's the story of 2020. We're all doing our best, except for Trump.
Yeah.
He's doing his best too. It's just weird.
His motivations and goals are just not aligned with anyone else.
I was thinking about doing speed or MDMA like every day as much as he does it, just to see what happens for a year.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah, yeah. He's wired. That guy's got energy.
Yeah, he's got energy. And then until he doesn't, and then it's weird when you catch him on those
Yeah.
moments where he's slurring and
What's up with the? Have you seen the water drinking videos where he's like trying to drink water? Like I got a cup. He literally takes it up to his lip, and then it's like everything breaks down. He's got to bring the other hand in to give it a boost all the way back. It's like, what is happening here?
uh,
Zuckerberg does the same thing. There's a whole bunch of footage of him having a tough time with simple human
did you
tasks.
see the footage from Trump's rally that he did? What is it? Yeah, yesterday, where he drank a cup of water normally and everybody fucking cheered and then he tossed the cup aside like, "Yeah, fuck, I just showed them." It's like this is the standard, like this is the bar we're at now. Look at me, I could drink fucking water. They said I couldn't drink water and I could drink water. And it's unfortunate that like, you know, people are like hammering on this stuff about him like, oh, is he healthy, is he not, like, is he healthy, is he not, it's a legit question.
He's clearly
He's
unhealthy.
clearly
He's clearly
unhealthy, he's
crazy.
clearly, but he started like attacking everyone else's health, so now they're attacking his health, and now he can drink a cup of water normally
Yeah.
and people fucking cheer. Like that's where we're at. Like it's what is going on? And I agree with,
I know.
like, it's I
Could you imagine going back in time to just have a podcast with yourself and just try and explain some of the things that are going on? Like you wouldn't believe it. Like it would it's so stupid and ridiculous that it's like you'd hear this story and be like, yeah, right. That's you're just pulling my leg. There's no
yeah,
way.
yeah,
There's no way.
yeah,
And here we are. What's your prediction for what's next in 2020? What do you think's going to happen next?
Man, yeah, this is a good one. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, like, what the hell can you what can you say? I mean, pandemic. I might have been able to be like, if someone was like, "Well, do you think there's going to be a pandemic?" I would just having come from the education that I came from. I was like, "Well, it's a possibility." Um, I didn't see riots coming. And although I don't want to call it, I don't want to say riots because obviously there was some rioting, but I think by and large there's been a lot of more peaceful protests than anything, which is interesting. That's an interesting thing. Uh,
Well, they're not all one thing, and everybody is just
yeah,
like they said, you want to label it all as one thing. It's like,
exactly.
well, you have so many different actors, so many different things going
Yeah,
on here.
and
What are we
everybody
talking
with a
about?
bone, like a dog in
Yeah,
the fight that's trying to label it as this or that, or yeah, that's a really frustrating one. And fuck, we could do a whole show just on that. But
yeah.
um,
I'd be curious. I'm too nervous to actually say anything publicly about my thoughts yet on this because I've honestly been taking my time trying to figure it out for myself, and it's only been in the last week that I've been able to even formulate my thoughts to my partner Ashley about what's going on because I've been so hyper cautious about what to do, you know. And I've been taking my time, and I'm not about to start telling you what I think right now and go off air and talk about it because I don't even I'm not there yet. Like I seriously, I'm not there yet. I'm trying to figure this out, and I don't want to bring the thought police after me for falling out of line if I do.
Yeah, yeah. You're
And it
just
freaks me
you're
out. It
biting your
freaks me
tongue because
out.
you just want to scream "All lives matter," right?
Oh God, I don't. That's the thing with these slogans. Like they're so crazy. Could you? That's a great example of like going back in time and saying, "Be like in 2020,
If you
there's going
say
to be
that,
Black Lives Matter, and then there's going to be All Lives Matter." If you say All Lives Matter, you're fucking racist,
but the
and you're an asshole, and you're a Trump supporter too. It's like, okay, well, like if these rules are valid and true, it's like, okay, well, I won't say that word. Like that's because I don't want to be a
yeah, of
racist.
course, of course.
You know?
I mean, the funny thing is, it's like it does seem arbitrary, but you can understand that in this. Like, I understand the sentiment of like when people say that, and I've heard people in my life say that, and but then it's just the question is just like
Well, it depends on what they're saying. If they're just speaking to you in regular English or
in
they know what it
response, yeah, in
means,
response
yeah, in
to
response, it's
this,
totally
then
different
it's
meanings to
totally
who's
different
saying
meanings.
it and when.
But I guess that's the thing, right? Like, is that it's like, how do we? I honestly, I feel like it's like sometimes I feel like the answers to these things are so simple, and that there's so much that we agree on, and yet we're focused on all the minutia of the disagreement. Like, I feel like, and it's like if you have a conversation with someone, let's say, for example, an older relative or something like that, whatever, the stereotypical conversation that you would have at Thanksgiving when things go awry, where someone brings up Black Lives Matter or the protests or something like that, and someone's like, well, you know what? All lives matter. Why are we? It's like, you know what? You're right. All lives matter. That's true. We all agree with that. No sane person
Yeah.
is going to disagree with that. However, at the moment, we have a group of people that are suffering, from some level
Disproportionately,
of
yeah.
injustice that's kind of baked into the way that, our society has worked, and it's historical, and you can see it,
Mm,
and you can find the example, and it's there. Everyone agrees with that. 90 people
mhm.
agree with that. But it's like, how do we, like you said, it gets so fragmented, it gets so, that you can't, when really the solution is,
Man, like I'm reading the news now and it's getting stupid. So you got Black Lives Matter protests. We got what anarchists, which I'm not even sure what they are. You got what are they called? Anti-fascists. What are they called?
Antifa,
Antifa.
yeah.
You and then it gets even better. I burst out laughing drinking my coffee the other day. I was like, the Boogaloos showed up. Have you heard about the
Oh, yeah, dude, you don't know
Boogaloos?
about the Boogaloos?
I've learned about the Boogaloos now, and I like just it's like you can't make this shit up. So it's like okay, we got machine gun carrying Hawaiian shirt Jimmy Buffett listening rednecks that some of
Those
them
are the
are
Boogaloos.
joining the marches. Some of them are joining the
Yeah.
marches. Some of them are white supremacists. It's like what is I can't even make sense of this. Like I can't. It's all
But I
nuts
think
to me.
this is where what you said, a good dose of leadership would go a long way, right?
Oh yeah, what?
But I think the thing that gets me about that I see about this is obviously, you have a lot of people with a lot of gripes, So whether it's,
Mm-hmm.
black people with their obvious, right, indigenous people with their obvious gripes about, the way they're treated in
Yeah,
society, then you have disenfranchised youth who see no way, no path forward to gaining a slice of the pie in the way that
yeah.
society goes. Then you have people who,
Game's rigged. There's no place for you. Millennial, you want to buy a house? Good
yeah,
luck.
exactly.
Like
Then you have the climate issues, right? And you see nothing
yeah.
getting done there. So it's like, to me, it's almost, it's not that. It's like, obviously I don't want to see people looting and burning and rioting and stuff like this, but on some level, I'm like, I understand it. When there's when
Mm-hmm.
there's when there's nothing left for you to do, and you feel like, even if you're just some asshole kid that, like, anarchist, whatever, that's just out there to grab some Nikes and stuff, it's like, at some level you're like, what is it to me? I don't give a fuck. I have no connection to the
Yeah.
community. I don't give a shit about this,
No, the sentiment of "fuck you," I
right?
understand. I totally
If you
get it.
feel like society or your community or nothing gives a shit about you, then why should you give a shit about it? So I understand that.
Well, that's a legitimate question because
Yeah, what are
yeah,
we?
what shit would you what would you have to give about
Yeah. I'm
the
just
institution if it's not for you in the slightest
well,
bit.
especially if you're just a cog and if I'm just meant to work for the company, like
Yeah.
I'm just a dot that's contributing to GDP.
Mhm.
Why the fuck would I care? And I think that's where it comes down to, is like changing the way that we view value. What do we value? What, like, GDP is a terrible way to it's a great way to produce wealth, but a measure of producing wealth, but it says
Yeah.
nothing about the happiness of your people. It says nothing about the health of
No.
your people. There's and I'm encouraged by people that are talking about these things in these alternative media spaces that we're just talking about. Like, yeah, the more I hear from Andrew Yang, the more I like the guy. Started listening to his podcast.
Did you hear Dark Horse duo
Oh, yeah,
theory with
yeah.
Weinstein and that or whatever?
Where he thought Yang should be at least in the vice president, if not president. Yeah,
The drafted presidency.
yeah. But I mean, this is
Thought it was an interesting concept.
this
Yeah.
is another thing you can think about, right? Like, how should we structure our politics, right? Like, what are the incentives now of the government? Is the incentives in my mind of the government should be to keep us safe and in provide the systems that do that keep us safe. So police, fire, healthcare, you know and the environment, protecting our environment, that's part of keeping us safe because we need a place to live. But what are the incentives? It's about producing wealth, it's about producing GDP, it's about you know and I mean, I
Yep.
don't know enough about economics to, this is where I'm just another asshole on the internet spouting some shit off, but I really feel like,
Welcome to my life,
yeah.
Brad.
Well, now you can come on this show and like
Yeah.
spout it to God knows who, maybe tens of people.
Wow, that'd be great.
But I feel like it's just like there's so much more that we agree on than that we disagree on people. And if you actually talked to people, not through social media, not through this or that, just like talk to people, 90% of them, you could find these places where it's like, do you want clean air? Yes. Okay, great. Do you want a job where you can live comfortably and support your family and not like break your back, all day? Yeah. Okay, great. There's there's probably a large consensus. And then if we look at that and say, okay, these are the things that we value, these are the things that we want, how do we adjust our means to get there, rather than this runaway train of produce more wealth, produce more wealth, produce more wealth. I know this sounds like some commie bullshit, but I'm definitely not, saying that everyone, has to have the same amount of money or anything like that. It's like, it's just, what do you value?
Well, it gets so extreme. Like, I always love these like scale games that people do to put into perspective the wealth disparity in the world. And like one of my favorites was just like what's the lowest denomination you would stop to pick up off the street? And it's like most people it's around 5 cents. Like, so then you equate that to Bezos or Gates or whatever. It's like 80 or 90 grand, or I can't, the scale is nuts. Like
Yeah.
for them to even have to just scoop it up and put it in their pocket. Or there's another good video out there online where they like represent Bezos's wealth with like grains of rice. Like 1 grain of rice is $100,000.
Yeah.
And then they just show you his wealth in terms of that pile. And it's like, so then a question for me is like, I don't want to live in a communist country either, but it's like, if you have this much, like we're talking about sums of money that like a human brain can't even comprehend the number, let alone what to do with it. Like
Yeah.
the number itself is beyond our
It's a
capacity of
waste
even
of wealth.
wrapping our head around. It's a waste of
Yeah.
wealth. It absolutely is, especially if you could take 99% of it away. And I'm not suggesting that's the fix, but say you could take 99% away and wouldn't even slightly affect the quality of life of the person that you took it away. They're still buying 10 yachts a
Yeah.
year and doing all the things they want
Yeah.
to do. But it's just this weird,
Yeah. It's hoarding.
like it doesn't even, it's hoarding of the pie. And it's like, that would be a lot better in other places. And you wouldn't even notice that it was
Yeah.
gone.
And you wouldn't live in fear of a mob coming for your for
You
your
wouldn't live in fear of
business,
a mob coming for yourself. Exactly.
but
Everybody would be a little bit better
that's the
off.
thing. I mean, there's I saw a paper like 4 years ago where someone was talking about this in terms of biology, and he's like, you can look at biological systems and see that resources accumulate at the top. Like this is it's and resources in terms of like energy, food, whatever. Like the in biological systems, this happens where left unchecked, resources eventually go to a small few at the top. And then something comes and redistributes that back into the environment. Storms, pandemics, whatever natural things that redistribute all the resources back into the ecosystem. And if you don't have that, then it becomes an unstable ecosystem. And the more unstable it becomes, the more likely there is that there's a big, event that's needed to redistribute all those resources. And I'm not saying that like, this is what the pandemic is a reaction to the, that's like some hippie bullshit, like providing, giving Mother Nature some kind of agency over that's not it. But your ability to withstand these big events, I think, is related to, the distribution of, these kind of things. Like if you have an unstable system where all the wealth is at the top and all the people at the bottom have nothing, then what are those people going to do? Eventually they're going to try and flip over the system because there's nothing in it for them. So
Yeah, it's not
some
working.
kind of wealth distribution makes sense, on some level. And you can argue about what that is, but I think that
Eh,
if you do that with the idea of what do we value, like if we can get some kind of, broad consensus on what our value is as a nation, as a people, or whatever, you would find that the way that our system works right now is not aligned with those values. And I think that's a big
yeah,
discrepancy. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing right now with all of this upheaval and all of these things, is that it's that. And so when you say to people, talk about wealth redistribution, or you talk about climate stuff, right? And the big pushback you always get is like, oh well, you're never going to get people to give up their this or that, or I don't want to have to, like if going green means I can't drive my car, then fucking I don't want to do that, but it's like, do you want to drive your car, or do you just want to have the freedom of mobility to go where you want to go? Because if you
right.
just want to go where you want to go, and we can solve that with like a fleet of autonomous vehicles that's like a car sharing Uber on the demand wherever you want. You could take it to Edmonton, you could take it to Vancouver, you could go wherever the fuck you want, but you don't have to own the car. Would you
I
do
like
that?
Elon Musk's tunneling plan with the. I like to think of myself in the future as getting into one of those like money tubes, vacuum tubes, like thunk,
Like in the Futurama
send me
cartoon where they're
off.
just, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
I'm into
right.
that.
And this is the thing, it's like it's challenging those things in people. It's like, well, what do you really want? Do you really want to own your car and drive? Like, the cars are the most ridiculous thing. I mean, I'm sure you've heard some of the same speakers I've heard talk about this, where it's like you drive your car for like 2 hours a day, and the rest of the time it sits doing nothing, and it's probably one of the biggest fucking expenses in your life.
Mm-hmm. It's
That
retarded.
seems like madness, right? Would you not want a better way? But when you first propose the idea to people, they're the and I feel like some of that, I mean, this maybe is getting a bit, conspiratorial or whatever, is that the people that want to sell you cars have made this thing where it's like, with advertising and anything. I'm not even saying it's like malevolent, like direct, this was the master plan, but it's just kind of gone that way. It's like, well, they want to sell you. So cars become a lifestyle thing. It becomes a wealth status thing. It becomes and that's just cars. I mean, but it's all these things.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've been thinking about this stuff for like a couple of years. It's just, if we just and it wouldn't even be that big of a switch of your lifestyle. You would I genuinely believe that there's enough on this planet to just like live within the means of the planet, like within the boundaries of the ecosystem on the planet, because we're not doing that. We're exploiting more than we should, but there's got to be a way of just doing it. And yeah, okay, maybe you don't own two cars, but you'll still be able to go where you want to go. Maybe you don't have a house with 3 floors and all of those rooms, but is that really, you know, is that really necessary? I don't know. Man, it's tough to tell people right now who have that house
Sounds like you're coming from my
Sounds like
things,
you're coming
Brad.
from it, right? Exactly. But I'm not. I'm just saying reevaluate, because that was the biggest switch, like moving here to Europe and seeing how people live in smaller things. And I'm not saying that like Europe's like this, whatever, there's no materialism, or there's tons. It's exactly the same as North America. But the confines of the environment, the constraints of the, we don't have as much land over here and stuff like that. People live with smaller, and it's just, you just adjust. And it's, I like it better. There's a lot of things to be said about this. There's more going out. There's more, community people. Well, not anymore, but, you don't just go home and go in your house and that's it. It's like, if you want to hang out with people, you go out. So there's people out. There's more activity. There's more,
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. Now I felt like I've just been going on for a while here.
Ashley just yelled at me through the door to wrap it up.
All right.
Our in-laws just showed up, so we gotta go hang out and have a barbecue.
All right, man. Well, let's wrap it up. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on, man. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, dude, you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So I love it.
There might not be a lot of truth coming from you, but there's something.
It's always
the lips are moving.
It's always good always good conversation. So thanks, buddy. We'll do it again.
All right, sounds good, brother.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did talking. I doubt that. I enjoy talking way too much. But as always, follow the show at Too Bad For You, Instagram, Twitter. You can hit me up at bvampired on Instagram, Twitter, and do get in touch. Like I said, please do get in touch. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know if there's something you want us to cover. And then otherwise, just subscribe, rate, review, anything like that can help us out. Tell a friend. And that's it. That's all. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate all of you. And yes, stay safe. Until next time. Bye now.